scary stories. So this happened when I was 9 years old during the summer. I grew up living with my parents and younger sisters, and our house was situated on a cul-de-sac. At the end of our cul-de-sac, there were a row of hedges with an opening at either end that led out to a huge field that had a tennis court, a playground, and a long pathway. This is relevant for later. Everybody that lived on our cul-de-sac knew each other pretty well. There were also a few kids my age, so I spent most of my free time playing outside on the grass with them. It's also worth noting that it was absolutely forbidden for any of us to venture out beyond the hedges without an adult, because our parents would not be able to see us from their houses. So one late afternoon, there were 5 of us sat on the grass chatting. It was pretty rare for someone that didn't live on the cul-de-sac to pass through, so it caught my eye when I saw a man making his way hurriedly along the pathway closest to my house. He had a scowl on his face and stared directly at us the entire time he was walking past. There was just a complete silence between us until we walked through the hedge opening, and I could tell by the other kids' faces they too felt uneasy about him. We then immediately asked each other if anybody knew or had seen him before. None of us had. It was quickly forgotten about, and soon enough, each of our mothers had called us in for dinner. Around 10 minutes after we had finished dinner, I was in the kitchen helping my mom with the dishes. Our kitchen had a large window that faced out onto the grass outside, so I was taken aback when the same guy walked past again, in the same hurried manner, with the same scowl, this time staring directly into our kitchen. He had walked past. I gasped and told my mom that weird man was staring at us earlier. She looked up at him walking past, but didn't see anything until he immediately walked past in the opposite direction, again staring at us as he walked past. I yelled, "Mom!" and pointed straight at him. She saw him and ushered me out of the kitchen, saying something along the lines of, "Don't be silly. He's probably looking for someone." I went upstairs to get washed and ready for bed, the entire time feeling a bit freaked out by him. From then onward, I started spotting him at least weekly standing outside our local places, such as the post office, our local convenience store, etc. Each time I saw him, he was alone and not really ever doing much, just standing and looking around. I was always in my mom's car when I saw him, so I just ducked and kept out of his vision whenever I saw him. There were no more direct encounters, so I figured he was probably new to the area, and over time my nervousness of him lessened. Fast forward to winter. I was at school and playing on the playground during our lunch break. Towards the top end of the playground was a padlocked gate that was about 8 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. It was rarely ever used, so it caught my attention when my vision raced past the gate and I caught a shadow standing there. I did a double take, and it was the man. He was pressed right up against the gate with both hands leveled, with his head gripping the bars, staring straight at me. I freaked the hell out and started screaming and hysterically crying, and made a run for it into the school building. One of the lunchtime supervisors, who also happened to live with her kids on our cul-de-sac, saw what had happened and took me straight into the nurse's office. The head teacher, along with a few other teachers, were called into the room and asked what had happened. I was too panicked to say anything outside of, "The man is out there." So the playground supervisor neighbor took over and explained to them. She said she had spotted him a few times on our cul-de-sac and had a bad feeling about him and had told her kids not to talk to him. The teacher went to another room to look at the footage of the security camera placed on the side gate. After a while, they came back to the nurse's office and decided to call my parents and the police. The decision was made for my parents to pick me up from school early so the police can come to our house and take a statement, and because I was a hyperventilating wreck. On the car journey home, my mom told me that the teachers had said the camera footage showed him standing at the gate and then sprinting away, which they figured was because I started screaming and crying. She said it was a good thing because I scared him away, but I was bright for my age, and I knew she was saying that only to comfort me. We meet the two police officers at our house, one female officer, one male officer. They are very friendly and make me feel at ease. Whilst they are asking me all of the relevant questions, they then asked me to describe what he looked like. But being so young, I could only say that he was white, tall, with short brown hair. They pressed for more information, such as tattoos. The only thing that come to mind that he looked like Dan Sullivan from EastEnders. This was met with instant laughter from both police officers and my parents, with the female officer commenting, "Wow, he must be quite good looking." As soon as she said this, my heart sank. After a while, the police had wrapped up the statement and told us to notify them to any more occurrences with this man. I was grateful for their help, but I could not help but feel like I wasn't being taken seriously by the adults. After this, I stopped seeing the guy around town, and the kids on our cul-de-sac say they don't see him either. Life goes on, and gradually, I regained the confidence to play outside again, both with friends and by myself. A year and a half later, I'm 11 years old, and it's the summertime. My parents had gone away on holiday, so my grandma and my aunt were staying at our house, looking after me and my younger sisters for the week. They were a lot more lenient than my parents and would let us play out for longer. And they even let me play over at the tennis court beyond the hedges. It was around 6 p.m. and was still light out, and I was racing my bike up and down the long path situated in the middle of the large field. I had completely worn myself out, and I was on the part of the path where it forks off near the tennis court, so I just sat on my bike for a while trying to catch my breath, while watching a group of people further down on the field playing cricket. Next thing I know, I hear somebody quietly but loud enough for me to hear it say, "Hey." I looked around, and I could not see anybody close enough that I would have been able to hear. I then hear a whistle, which leads my eyes directly over to an alleyway sandwiched between the hedgerow and the tennis court, and I recognize it to be the man from when I was younger. The sheer shock of seeing him again completely froze me up. I could not move. He steps out of the alleyway with one hand over his crotch area. He then uses the same hand to gesture me to come over, and it's then that I see the top button of his pants and his fly undone. I accept the very worst is most probably about to happen, and I instantly go into panic mode. I know that I need to get to safety ASAP, and I figured out my options. The first option is to head straight down the field to the group of people playing cricket, but I don't know these people, and I don't know if I can rely on them to keep me safe from this man. My second option is to ride my bike as fast as I can down the path past the tennis court, around the corner, and into my cul-de-sac. However, the man is in the alleyway, and if he ran through it, he would easily beat me to the hedge opening to block my way, or catch me if he wanted. I started pedaling like a madman and decided to head to my cul-de-sac. As I turn the corner, I see that he isn't at the end of the alleyway yet, so I bomb it through the hedge opening. I hear him running and saying, "Just come here." So I race down the pathway and make it to my house. The entire time I'm shouting for my grandma and aunt, and the kids playing out on the grass, figuring something is up, and ask what is wrong. I ditch my bike outside my house, go inside and lock the door, and I find my aunt in the kitchen. She's panicked and asked me what's wrong. So I explain everything as fast as I could and say we need to call the police. The next thing I know, I hear the kids outside yelling and screaming, "Go away," and calling for their parents. We look outside the kitchen window, and the man is walking past our house looking at me dead in my eyes, completely undeterred by the commotion outside and my aunt standing next to me. He walks out of our line of vision, out of the cul-de-sac and down the road. My aunt tells me to quickly come with her in her car to follow him, so she can at least see if she can follow him to where he lives. I get in the car and sit in the passenger footwell, out of sight. After about 4 minutes of driving, she brakes and asks, "Is that him?" I poke my head up. We are literally outside of one of my best friend's houses. He's standing at an old beaten-up telephone booth that hasn't worked all the time I've known it to be there. He's holding the phone to his ear, but it isn't saying or doing anything. To his right are 3 girls, a little older than I am, sat on a bench chatting away. Oblivious to the man stood silently at a public telephone that doesn't work. My aunt parks her car and says she's going to sit and watch and make sure the girls are okay, and tells me to stay down. After no longer than a minute, my aunt says these girls are getting up, so I poke my head up again, and I see them go on their way. Suddenly the man literally just drops the phone and turns around on the spot to face the girls. Before he can even take a step out of the telephone booth, my aunt starts honking her horn and opening her door to yell at him to go away and leave the girls alone. I see him completely freak out and make a break for it up an alleyway with which has 2 exits. The girls turn around and try to figure out what's going on, but my aunt pulls away and was headed over to one of the alleyway exits. My aunt tells me to get her phone from her bag to call the police. We get to exit number 1, but he is nowhere to be seen, so we head to exit number 2. Meanwhile, the policewoman on the phone says she is sending for a patrol car to the area and another to our house, so we can give a statement. We get to exit number 2, and again we can't find him anywhere. We decide to head home to meet the police, where I give another statement. The police officers sent this time around take me much more seriously, and after the statement was given, they said they will also spend some time driving around the immediate area looking for the guy. From then on, I did not see the man at all, and nor did my friend. We did not ever receive any type of update from the police, so I never knew what came of the investigation. The situation ended up with me being super protective and paranoid over my younger sisters whenever they were playing outside unsupervised. And I worried that if they were caught up in the same situation, they might not have been as lucky as I am. So scary, weird guy, let's not ever meet again.
I'm originally from a major city in southern Ohio, and outside of the town, there are a number of smaller townships. One of these is known as the more country bumpkin redneck grit part of town. It's not even the same county, but it is part of the general area my city is in. In the woods there's this legend of Hell's Church, supposedly an old church that burned down where Satanists do rituals now, or a Satanist church that burned down by a ritual. There are a number of Hell's Church myths in Ohio in many different places, but this one was close to us, and a number of my guy friends decided they wanted to be ghost hunters and check out haunted places around where we lived. We were juniors in high school, and while all of us obviously thought this was just stupid bullshit, we thought it was funny to go out and scare ourselves. Plus, most people had cars or driver's license by now, so we were enjoying our new burst of freedom. I'm a scaredy cat about most stuff like this, but I was the most tomboyish girl in the group and always kind of wanted to be able to hang out with the guys. Plus, some of the girls in the group were going, so I didn't want to look like a loser or a pussy. So one day in November, we decided we were going to go out one night and try and find this church. We had actually been to this location once before that fall, but one of my friends had a curfew. So after exploring an old barn and the railroad tracks on a bridge nearby, we left. We hadn't found the church. We took 2 cars out there going past more populous parts of our city and back to this woodsy area. I can't honestly tell you how we got out there, but I know it's off a state highway, then an abandoned access road, past some old warehouse, and then down a dirt road. Once you get down the dirt road, there's a kind of thicker part of the road early on where we parked cars off of the shoulder. We did this because the road thins out and becomes impossible to drive down, and also someone clearly owns this land, and later down the road there is some no trespassing signs. I'm not sure a ton of kids come back here, so it did not seem odd to me that they wanted to block this place off. I barely thought twice about it at this time. We get out of our cars and start walking down the dirt road, wandering off the path from time to time to check out barns and clearings where we thought the chimney might be. At first, it was just scary because it was dark and old, or whatever, but then the barns started to get weirder, like they were filled with weird spray painting, symbols, and bullshit. But that's not what bothered us, but also other stuff like dead owls that looked like they had been opened up, and other bits that looked like they might have come from animals. I was grossed out, but we all kind of agreed that this probably came from the same teenagers trying to fake a satanic ritual, or that the animals got trapped in the falling part of the barn and died in there. My friends are now hardcore trying to find this stupid chimney, so they keep taking off through the trees into clearings. Myself and the other 2 girls who were there kind of hang back on the tree line for most of them, getting a little more nervous and a little irritated with all the coming up empty. As we keep going, we find a bike on the tree line, like a bike that maybe a 12-year-old would ride. That's a little creepy, but fine, whatever. Probably belonged to someone who owned the land. We decided we were going to go a little further, and soon enough we find another bike. This one is older, a little rusted, but still undersized. We did not talk too much about the other bike, just kind of mumbling that it's probably still nothing. 1 or 2 of the 4 guys who were there kind of trying to tump it up, saying these kids probably got murdered, or stuff like that, but no one is really having it. By this point, we have been here for about 2 hours and it's getting really late. Plus, I think we were all a little more creeped out than we wanted to admit. We decided to head back to the cars, and I'm feeling relieved, happy to be headed back to my house and the hell out of there. But things never work out that way, do they? By the cars, we see a road that goes straight up a hill through the trees. At the start of it, there's a big metal gate that had a road closed sign on it, which we had seen before, but for some reason it had never occurred to us to try and go up to the road. We had a small debate at the gate about an even split on who wanted to venture up and who did not. I absolutely did not, but eventually we decided we'll go up there, just to see. Both of the drivers want to go, so there's not a lot we can do about it. We climb up the gate and start up the hill, where an old pavement road is cracked and crumbled under our feet, though it was, for sure, a real asphalt road at some point. In addition to the road condition and the brush being an obstacle, someone had a full bunch of trees over the path, purposely blocking the road from any cars. Some of us are starting to seriously question if we should be doing this, arguing that someone obviously wanted to keep us out of here, but we get teased for being afraid and keep going. I could not see where the road would end because it was so dark and the tree made it hard to see. Plus the road was super steep, so all you could really see was up, with the little moonlight peeking through the trees. All of a sudden, we reach the end. The trees just open up, and we have come off the incline to a flat field, and holy shit, what a sight it was. It's the flat field with tall prairie grass on either side. The path we are on splits the large clearing we are in down the center and leads through the grass. Two look like they are farmhouses and one varnished building, and while they may have been painted at one point, it looked like they had been mostly weathered and stripped by time. I see this and I am done. I want to leave. But of course, some of my friends say that we have to check out these buildings. At this point, I finally put down my foot, as do the other two girls and one of our guy friends, who decided this is enough for him. So the three guys who want to go to the buildings tell us just to wait there. While we don't want to be in this field out in the open, we decide we can't just leave them. At this point, we have turned off our flashlights because the moonlight is so strong. The three of them take off down the little path, and the four of us who remain stand together, bitching about how stupid our friends are and making small talk. None of us say it, but we are all looking to the grass every now and then, worried something is going to jump out. It's just so creepy, this abandoned little settlement. It feels like our friends are gone forever. We see them get to a building and go inside. We can see the flicker of their flashlights in the windows. And I just remember feeling so tense, it was like watching a horror movie in real life. After maybe 10 minutes, we see our guy friend coming towards us, lightly jogging, looking afraid for the first time all night. "You idiots went inside?" I said, pissed off at them. One of my friends just looks at us, and I'll never forget it. It was full of bikes, just bikes, chained to the walls. We did not believe them, kept waiting for them to say they were kidding, but they insisted, said it was like they were just storing a bunch of bikes there, most of them smaller. They looked afraid. As much as I didn't want to believe them, I did. They are not the type of guys to pull a prank for this long. By then, we all agree we need to get the hell out of there. And we start down the hill, hurrying the best we can. All of a sudden, about halfway down the field, we can see a car's headlights down the hill about where our cars are. We see them pass slowly, and we know that someone is down there looking for us. Because it's so far off the beaten path, we figure it's one of two things: the cops, and we are going to be screwed for trespassing, the people who own this land or these houses or something, and they are going to A, call the cops, or B, murder us. We know that the road isn't that long, so they'll be turning around, circling back soon enough because our cars are there. They'll probably wait for us. We are all whispering about this as we pick up the pace, sprinting down the hill as fast as we can. I'm not a good runner, but I was hauling ass, getting down as fast as I could, basically hurtling over the falling trees. Once we get down the hill, we don't see any headlights, but we know they can't be far away. "Get in the damn cars," one of our friends yells, and we're fumbling with the doors like in a horror movie, just too nervous to get into the cars. We get in, and just as we start the cars up, we see the headlights speeding down the road, a giant black truck roaring behind us. The truck seemed larger than life. Raised off the ground, the whole thing was terrifying, but extra terrifying that we could not see who was driving in the dark, with the headlights blinding us. We peel out of there, Total pedal to the metal. This truck is still following us, bearing down on us as our two cars race out of there. The car is also getting real close to us, threateningly close, almost like it was trying to run us off the road. We are all screaming, looking back at the truck, fighting for some distance. Once we get to the highway, we are switching lanes, trying to escape. Luckily, we were in sedans, so it is easier for us to weave in and out of cars. But this truck is still chasing us. We are in two different lanes, but don't want to get too separated from our friends. The passengers of both cars are texting back and forth trying to make a plan. It took us about 15 minutes to lose the truck. I'm not sure if the distance was too much or if they turned around, but once we got to a big shopping center area, we ducked off the road and into a Sonic parking lot. We all sat in our cars for a little bit, watching to make sure that we weren't going to get snuck up on before getting out of our car to get some food and talk. Everyone was pretty shaken up. It took us a while to settle down enough to head home. As much as we talked it over, we just could not figure out what had happened. Eventually, we all went home during what was a pretty silent car ride, exhaustion and lingering fear taking over. We did not talk about it again for a long time, and we never called the police, which honestly, as an adult now, I feel like we should have. I don't think about it often, only during the fall, really. But when I do think about it, I ask myself, who chased us? Why was the town abandoned? Who owned those bikes? And where are they now?
This story happened about 2 years ago while I was in university working on my degree in biology. I had signed up for a trip to gather samples for an experiment some students in the ecology department were doing to run. It required the collection of samples from several sites, so they recruited biology, ecology, and forestry majors to help them complete the sampling in a shorter period. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours from my uni in the Pacific Northwest. We got to the campsite in the late evening and set up our tents. One of the other students had brought a big container of split pea soup from home and was sharing it with the others on the trip. I don't really care for split pea soup, so I declined the offer. Everyone had some except me. One other student and the professor come the next morning. The 5 students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best of shape. They were in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning and were in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours to collect samples we needed. The professor who was supervising us had originally some rules, such as people travel in groups of at least 2 and we had to return to camp by nightfall. Now those rules were tossed out to make sure we kept to our timetable and collected all of the required samples. We were just told to do your best to complete the work assigned as long as you can do it safely. That morning I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so I ran into the stream I was supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of the water and soil. This meant I had to hustle to get back before dark. Halfway through the day I realized that wasn't going to happen. About 2 miles into my hike I stopped for lunch sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was really peaceful until I smelled the cigarettes. It wasn't the smell of a cigarette being smoked, more the musky smell of a heavy smoker's car where cigarette butts had been left to ferment for weeks on end. I looked around but could not see anyone. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me. But minutes later the smell hadn't faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't that thick, but there was still a lot of places for someone to duck behind a tree bush. I was unnerved that someone was apparently staying close enough to me for me to smell them for this long without so much as a word. I quickly packed up the trash from my lunch and continued up the stream. The musty cigarette smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location late into dusk that I smelled it again. The woods
were getting really dim by this point. Looking back on it, it was really a stupid idea to stay out so late, as just hiking back to camp in the dark would be pretty dangerous even without a cigarette smoking stalker. Having just put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkened woods looking for whoever was giving off the smell. I did not see anything that caught my attention. It would actually be more correct to say I saw too many things in the dim light that might have been a head sticking out from behind a tree or someone crouched low in the foliage. I didn't like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who, for the second time, was lurking near me without revealing themselves, so I began to double time and back down the stream. I made much better time on my way back, even though it was dark, because I didn't have to stop to take any samples. Even so, I didn't get back to the camp till a bit before 10. I was the last one to get back, and everyone but the professor was already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because he seemed tired as it was, and he headed to bed in his RV soon after I got back. I headed to my tent soon after. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head into the woods to do my business, as I knew some of the other students were still feeling ill and needed the RV toilet for more urgent matters than just having to take a leak. I walked around 100 feet into the woods, found a tree, and did what I needed to. As I turned to go back to camp, something caught my eye. Somewhere off in the woods, there was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was until it flared momentarily, and I realized it was the cherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while watching the red ember glow fade dim and move slightly closer to the ground, as whoever was smoking would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, I assumed they were watching the camp. I did not know if they had seen me make my way into the woods or not, as the fire had been doused and the moon was only half full, so there wasn't very much light. I made my way slowly back to the camp as quietly as I could and entered the RV to wake up the professor. I told him about the person smoking in the woods and about the smell of cigarettes earlier that day. However, when we got outside the RV, the ember from the cigarette was gone. My professor woke up the other students who hadn't come down with food poisoning, and we took turns watching over camp. I didn't see or smell anything else when I was on guard duty, and went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning, the professor and the other students and I went to where I guessed the smoker had been standing the night before, and sure enough, we found about 10 cigarette butts on the ground next to a tree. The tree itself looked like someone had been twisting or stabbing a knife into its bark, and outer layers of wood had been damaged and chipped away. The professor decided that the group should head back that day, even though we hadn't collected all of the samples we were assigned to. We packed up camp and drove down the thin dirt trail without incident. The second we got onto the paved highway, a white paneled van pulled out of a clearing just off the shoulder and began following us. This van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets that we did, and only stopped following us when we turned onto the road leading to our university campus. Everyone was freaked out by this, but it was around 9 at night on a weekend, so the security office on our campus was closed. We decided to unload the RV and call it a night, as the van hadn't followed us onto campus. I offered to help the professor catalog and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it was another couple hours before I left the biology sciences building and started heading towards the dorm building I lived in. I stepped out into the cool air and began walking, my professor having left the building in the other direction to get to his car and drive home. It was a couple dozen feet outside of the building, which was now locked, when I was hit with the musty smell of old cigarettes. I looked around, and about 25 yards away in the darkness of the footpath, I saw the cherry of a cigarette smoldering away. I was pretty scared at this point, but hoped it was only a student
I couldn't completely convince myself of this, as the musty cigarette smell was the same as what I smelled in the woods the previous night. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later, I looked over my shoulder and saw the cigarette cherry bobbing in the darkness. The smoker was following me. This creeped me out a bit more, but I still held it together. That until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a white paneled van parked alone in a parking lot. I took off at a sprint toward my dorm building. I looked over my shoulder a few steps into my run and saw the cherry of the cigarette fall to the ground and the dark shape beginning to move after me. I didn't look back again. I could hear someone running in the grass off of the footpath. I got to the entrance of my dorm building and frantically waved my key card in front of the card reader that controlled the door lock. As soon as I hear the soft beat, I opened the door, jumped through the doorway, and shut the door quickly. I stopped and peered through the glass door. I saw the dark shape stop just short of the lit pathway. I just watched for a minute or two. Then I saw the spark of a lighter. The light is just barely bright enough to illuminate a shaggy beard and brim of a baseball cap before it disappears and was replaced with the red glow of a cigarette. I turned and headed up the stairs to my dorm room. By the time I get to my window overlooking, I had just run through. There is no trace of a dark figure or a cigarette cherry. After that, I didn't see the white paneled van again, or smell that musty cigarette smell, and I hope I never do. This isn't something that happened to me, but something that happened to my best friend. This happened only a few weeks ago. Here's a little background. My best friend walks her dog all the time on the trail. It's a trail in a public park. It's popular and a lot of people go there. She pulled into the parking lot and got her dog out of the car without an issue. As she was walking over to the trail, she noticed a man standing a little back in the woods and staring at her. He was standing right by the entrance to the trail. She said he was a man in his mid-20s. She told me she thought he had a dog and that the dog was going to the bathroom. As she got closer, she realized he didn't have a dog. She was maybe 10 or 15 feet away from him, and he still stared at her. He didn't say anything to her. She felt uneasy and booked it back to her car. He followed her back to her car. She quickly got in and locked the doors. He started banging on her windows. She couldn't make out much of what he said. She drove off and called the police. The police asked her if she spoke to the man and didn't seem to take it seriously at first. They finally said they would send somebody out to look. It scared the hell out of her. She went to a different trail to walk her dog. She hasn't seen him since, thank God. I hope he was caught because he could stalk her or another girl again. Whoever the hell this creepy guy was, I hope they never meet my best friend again. It was 2016 and I asked my husband to drop me off at the nearest arboretum on his way to his job, my favorite park. Usually there were a lot of joggers and people with dogs, so it didn't seem like a bad idea to just go in the middle of the day by myself. On that particular day, I think I was almost alone except for another guy. I kept running into him, maybe mid-30s, taking pictures. He looked like a park ranger, so at first I didn't find him creepy or unusual. I am also there taking pictures. I just start making it a point to get away because I didn't want to ruin his photos. At some point I got the feeling like I am the subject of his photos, and that is when I started getting creeped out. I started looking for a way out of the park. As I made my way out, he was there again. I tried to keep it friendly and say something innocent related to the job, and he said, "Oh, I don't work here." He said nothing more. We were out of the park and I ran up to my husband's car and loudly said, "Hi honey, I miss you."
Not deterred by my husband's presence at all, the guy came over before I could even tell my husband about what had just happened. And he said, "By the way, my name is Jordan. Check out my photos on Facebook." And he handed me a business card. I never did check out his page, but his business card floated around my bag for months, reminding me that I didn't enjoy solo hiking anymore.